And here we go indeed. Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics coming to you live and unedited this Saturday evening. Well, evening here in India at least, on the 4th of October. And good to see people in the chat already. Hi, Sleepy Reader. Good to see you. Parikshit, good to see you. I'm just going to have to make sure that I'm coming through all right. So, those of you who are the early birds, you know the drill. If you're a regular, let me know if the video is all right. Let me know if the audio is all right. And then we can get started. Also, let me know if the audio and the video are synced up together. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay, but this is just stuff off the at the top of the live stream to make sure that everything is going all right. Good to see everyone in the chat. Good to see people watching. Thank you so much for joining. And this is just like the previous live stream we had, an impromptu surprise live stream. I wasn't really planning a live stream. In fact, I was planning on making a video that I would launch on Sunday. However, as these plans have been tending to go awry, this one went awry as well, because this was a very busy week. It was a festival. There were people over. We've been unusually social, Ashwita and I, over the last couple of weeks, or at least I am generally a hermit. Ashwita is the social one, but there have been people over. We've been going over to people. It's just that season right here in New Delhi, in Chitranjan Park particularly. So it's been very hard to get a lot of things done. I've also been very busy with other stuff, including writing the third chapter that is supposed to be coming out mid or late November of my comic book. So all of that meant that the kind of video that I wanted to make with the editing, etc., is just going to take a little bit more time. So that's been pushed to the next week. And instead, what I thought I could do is talk a little bit about another surprise, a surprise haul, something that was absolutely unintended. I had no idea this was going to happen. And I did end up buying a number of different comics. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about how these things happen, how this particular thing happened, but also exchange some views with all of you about this hobby of ours and these kind of ups and downs and the kind of deluge that has happened right now, and just share our experiences while also taking a look at a number of these books. Most of them are off frame, but if you've seen the thumbnail of this video, you would get a sense of all the comics that I would like to talk about. Are we sure you're not AI? Sleepy Reader asks. Yes, that is the thing to ask from now on. My hands seem to be properly rendered, but I think AI is getting good at that. I'll just leave it for the viewers to decide whether this is AI. I think video can't last longer than 8 seconds yet. So given the fact that these live streams tend to be a minimum of 1 hour, I would say an average of 2 hours, I think we're still at that. We're at the thing that AI can't yet generate. Ashwita is in the chat. Hello, good to see you, Ashwita. Ashwita and I, keeping with our social butterfly nature, were out till just a short while ago. We were actually at a museum. We were at the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art here in New Delhi, which is having an exhibition of Indian comics and zines and ephemera. There are actually 3 different displays or exhibitions on. One of them happens to be curated by Bharat Murthy, who Indian indie comics creators absolutely will know as one of the co-founders, creators of the Indie Comics Fest. And he is also an academic, and he's put together this wonderful exhibition of Indian comics and Indian comics through the ages, which is where we were. This is something that's running in New Delhi till January. So if you happen to be in New Delhi, you should definitely check that out at the KNMA, which is where we were right now, but we rushed home in order to be able to make this live stream. That's just how jet setting our lives are right now. Michael, hey, good to see you, but cannot watch live, sadly, will watch the replay. We will be glad to see you. And this is another thing that I want to say. If you are watching this right now, or if you're watching this later, the recorded version, the replay, make sure that your chat says live chat instead of top chat, because top chat is only a selection. Live chat is all of it. And the chat really is at least half the charm of these live streams. So go ahead and make sure you have live chat enabled so you can see everyone's chat coming through over here. I did have a nice holiday break. Thank you, Parikshit. It is busy in Mysore during the Sera festival, so you couldn't go out much. Wow, so there were helicopters from the Air Force flying over. Yes, we had Durga Puja over here. Diwali is coming up. This is a big festive season. Dashera just ended. So this is yes, in India, it's at least here in North India, but also obviously in Mysore, it seems to be a very busy and social time for everyone. AI still has that plastic look. Josh says, yes, absolutely. I think the the video is a little too smooth and creamy, maybe, and it doesn't have a lot of consistency. There are a lot of problems with AI. The visual aesthetic of it is probably the least of the problems. There are larger spiritual problems as well. Karn Shrikant, good to see you. You have caught me live-handed, hopefully not for the last time. Is India on the verge of a new comics golden age? What a good question, Sleepy Reader. This is the kind of question that we expect from a scholar such as you. Damien, I don't know what would be classified as a golden age right now, because I think very often it's a mixture of quality and sales or commercial. So the golden age of television is not only when great TV shows are being made, like was being talked about maybe 10 years ago, particularly when that trinity of Mad Men and Breaking Bad and something else. But, you know, it started a little while ago. It's not just about the quality of the work, but it's also about the popularity of it. Like, a lot of people are watching this. So although I do think that the respect for comics and the appreciation of comics and the use of comics for self-expression is definitely on the rise and is getting more and more diverse in its approaches every day, I am not yet sure about that readership. It's one of those questions that, as a new to the world of publishing comics person, as a new publisher, it's foremost on my mind is, are there enough readers? And that's something that people often ask, is that, why are you getting into publishing comics? Do you think there is enough of a market for it? Which is a question that is simultaneously aggravating, but of course you know why it's being asked, because that's a valid question to ask anyone starting a business. But I hope that there is a golden age coming, and I hope it lasts for a long time. I don't want anything overnight, because that seems like it might evaporate overnight. I'd much rather it be built slowly and then have that rock solid foundation to last for a long time, which is the way I'm hoping it goes. It is a spooky month. That's the month of October, right? And with Halloween coming up, I'm pretty sure that we'll be seeing a lot of YouTube channels talking about horror comics and their favorite horror comics. I, of course, am not at all aligned to such things, algorithmic or otherwise. I had, for the last year and a half, I've been planning a top 10 Superman video, or actually the way I've phrased it in my notes is what Superman means to me, or Superman and I, a personal history, or things like that. And I've got the comics selected. I kind of know what I want to say about most of them, but there's how do I bring it all together? And I've been wrestling with this. And it did strike me that with the launch of a brand new Superman movie and a reset, etc., this would be the perfect time to make that video. Of course, I didn't make any such video. I've never been able to capitalize on the trending things, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Sleepy Reader says we have to hope a readership can be grown by good publishers. Absolutely. I love that idea. I think that's one of the reasons why Ashwita and I wanted to start a publishing company. We want to create that sort of support system. We want to create that mechanism in whatever tiny little way we can. We want to contribute to that. There are other publishers who are also doing that. And then there's self publishing, something that we've been very admiring of and want to sort of contribute to that. But interestingly, that also relates to today's video, to today's live stream of this particular hall, how it came to be and why it has the texture it does, in no small part has something to do with this notion of publishers. And I'll get into it. I just want to say hello to everyone putting the comments in there. Partworks Comics Reader says 6 weeks until Thought Bubble. Yes, that's very exciting. I think that's one of those festivals that has grown in leaps and bounds over the years. I've been familiar with Thought Bubble and have been hearing about it for ages, for a decade, maybe even longer. But over the years, I've found it to become now a destination. People are traveling not just within the UK, but internationally to attend Thought Bubble. And I'm not talking about artists and writers who normally would. I'm talking about people attending it just as readers. And that, to me, is a sure, it's a great example of how the culture of independent comics, of, when people say comics, to a large extent, a lot of people still think about the big two, or Superman and Spider-Man, Marvel and DC. But the growth of other comics and genres and styles, etc., is I think Thought Bubble is a very good example of that growth. And in fact, it's gotten so big, I think it's no longer in Leeds anymore. I think it hasn't been for the last couple of years. I forget where it's moved to, but it's moved because it's grown so big. That's great. It's a Mid-Autumn Festival for Chinese and Koreans. Yes, absolutely. This as the fall comes in, I have to think that culturally speaking and historically, there must have been harvest seasons and things like that, which is why we have so many different festivals all across the world. Of course, it also depends on the weather and before the winter kicks in, again, depending on where you are. Affordability is an issue for comics in India, Parikshit says, and that's absolutely right. I do know that, comics are expensive for anyone, but I think particularly when you are so price sensitive, the way the Indian market is, there is a way of thinking that has to do with value. There's a word that we use a lot called vasuli, and that's the worth, but how would I translate it? It's almost as if it's like mileage, the bang for your buck factor. And comics being things that are read fast, fairly or unfairly, 200 comics pages isn't as meaty for some people, for many people, as 200 prose pages. And then you're paying triple or quadruple what you would pay for a prose book, because of the various reasons that we are aware of, production and color and artwork and paper, things like that. It does make it difficult, of course. So price sensitivity is a thing, but that's just the nature of the beast. You can have lower prices if you have large print runs, but large print runs only come with a huge readership or a potentially huge readership. So in some ways, it's circular. The traditional chicken or egg is like, do I publish more or do I wait for readers, or how will I get readers if I don't publish more? And the price is a big sticking point in the middle of that, and cracking that, I don't think it's easy. It's almost as if creating print products today, and I think digital and digital dissemination might be a slightly different ballgame, but creating print products today does feel like a niche activity. And in some ways, it does feel a little elite given the prices that it results in. However, is there a solution? Is there a different way of approaching it? Can you make cheaper comics? Well, then you're not going to have the kind of production you want. But also, is the readership there? So there's obviously stuff that sells a lot more than some other stuff. But finding that balance for every single project, for every single person, for every single reader or publisher, I think that's the real challenge. And then you've got things like color and size and things like that. The biggest issue is shipping. That I would agree with you. I think the freight, and of course, if you're making hardcovers, freight, moving things from point A to point B is a big deal. And this reminds me, Ashwita reminded me about this, is that one of those things is the availability of the comic that I'm working on with Nikhil, The Sun is Made of Silver. The 2 chapters of it, getting it out to readers in other countries has been this huge challenge, given the costs and given the freight costs part of it, where the books might themselves be quite reasonable or affordable, but once you put freight into it, it kind of becomes prohibitive. And this is not even talking about taxes or tariffs or duties and other things like that. So recently, maybe it's not recent anymore, but recently when I traveled to the United States, I took a bunch of them with me, and I was very excited and thrilled to be able to sell to viewers and friends in the United States. And we shipped out a number of copies. In fact, we sold out of everything we had taken with us. And right now, a friend of mine a friend of ours is traveling in the UK and has taken a number of the comics to send to anyone who wants to order them. So before I forget, if you are in the UK or if you are in the EU and you are interested in my comic, check the description, check the notes of this video. There are 2 links over there, and tonight is the last night. I've made a couple of announcements, so they're just leaving the UK, so they won't be able to ship out anymore after this. So tonight's the last night that they're available. We do still have a handful of sets, and by a set, I mean chapter 1 and chapter 2 put together. It's available in the UK and in the EU for shipping because that stock is right there, but it is limited. So in case you're interested, go with that. But yes, shipping is a big deal. And I think ebooks, therefore, are one of those things. I'm not an ebook reader. I'm not a digital reader, as longtime viewers of this channel will know, but I cannot fault the power it has to get across problems like this, the problems of shipping, the problems of availability, and also the problems of fragility and tearing. And it's not just the cost of shipping, but how much damage you might incur and how much wasted stock you might end up with unless you're packaging it a particular way. And is that always practical? And then it has its own cost consequences, of course. So it's a puzzle that we have to solve and fix. But yes, I think comics readership faces a lot of challenges, not just the more legacy psychological biases or prejudices, but a lot of practical monetary issues do confound any sort of approach to it, as I am finding out. So things like festivals, things like public spaces, libraries, for example, are, to me, a fantastic solution for the cost, for the space, all of those kind of things. However, as we've talked about many times before, I'm extremely jealous of countries that have great public libraries and have a library system. It's really envy inducing because such a thing does not exist in India and definitely does not exist for comics. It's a thing that I would like to do one day. And I know I meet people and talk to people all the time who have that similar dream of creating such a space, of creating such libraries in which you can stock comics and then people can come and read them over there with a membership. And that's a way to get readership without necessarily it being an expensive thing, without necessarily worrying about, do I have room? As I've been told on many occasions, not everyone is willing to cover every square inch of their walls with bookshelves the way that Ashwita and I might be okay with. But the Kindle, yes, exactly. I'm not a fan of the Kindle. I don't mind digital reading when it's prose, but comics never been able to do it. And it's particularly the double page spread. Now, web comics formatted for the web, as I always say, that's a different thing altogether. But let's see how we go. But there is this, and it's great to see Josh saying that it is a good way to sample things. And that's a way that I know a lot of people use digital reading, where they'll read a couple of issues, for example, of a new series, or they'll read a little bit of something, or they'll even read a whole book digitally. And if they really like it, they'll buy it in physical format in order to have in their collection. It's a thing that has to be worth reading more than once in order to be owned. And I can get that. I understand that. I tend to buy everything. And this is, again, connected to the topic of conversation today. But I also do think that I should learn how to cull things that I don't think I'm going to return to, things I may not want to read again, or I know I'm not going to read again, things I don't enjoy anymore. I've got to figure out a way of getting them out of the house, which is, again, one of those things that I'm not very good at doing. I'm not very good at selling things and going onto the marketplace or haggling with people. These are things that I run into as stumbling blocks, and I've often wondered whether I should do things like giveaways. And of course, I know there are some people, especially people in India, who would love that, but it just seems a little unfair because I'd only be able to give away something to a certain group of people and not to my entire audience. I wouldn't be able to treat because I can't ship internationally. It's way too expensive to do giveaways like that. This is not that kind of a channel. It doesn't have that kind of potent viewership and numbers and money coming in. So the fact that I wouldn't be able to 88% or 89% of my viewers wouldn't be able to be eligible for a giveaway I do seems to me to be too high a number and too unfair, which is why I don't do that kind of stuff. Sleepy Reader says that he's loving reading on his 13-inch iPad. Yeah, I can see that. And I have seen people drawing on iPads. And first of all, tablets are a lot bigger than I remember them being. So maybe that's just me as an old man not aware of how technology has progressed. But it looks beautiful. It looks fantastic. Nikhil, who is my co-author in The Sun is Made of Silver, for this series is drawing everything on Procreate. And when I look at it on the iPad, it looks really good. So I don't have a problem. But I will say I'm looking at it at one row at a time, or 3 panels at a time. I'm not necessarily looking at a double page spread. So a large enough tablet to show you a double page spread at the same time, that is the ideal reading thing, because I do like that two-page format for comics. So I think it's getting there, if it's not already there, and I will soon try it and see how it looks. I've got a small iPad left, my mom's old iPad, which I use for annotating roughs and things like that. So I'm getting more used to working on an iPad for certain things, but I still don't use it for reading. This stuff back here is still the way that I want to do my reading. All right, so let's get this show on the road, shall we? With a little bit of an introduction to what exactly are we talking about here as far as this hall is concerned. So a couple of weeks ago, Amazon India had a huge sale. I think it might still be continuing. I'm not sure. It's one of those annual sales. I'm sure Amazon has them in every region that they're in. Some sort of, or maybe they have it more than once a year. But the Great Indian Sale is what it's called here in India. And the Great Indian Sale has a lot of hoo-ha build up to it, etc. And I'm probably, like many of us, not the biggest fan of Amazon, and particularly creating that sort of rush. Everything I say after this is going to be complete contradiction to what I'm saying right now. Oops, I just dropped a battery somewhere over here. Let me see if I can get it out of the way. I think I can. I'll come back to that later. Let's see if it's in the shot. it seems to be all right. Okay, that's good. I do have another camera over there, but it's so jankily set up that I'm not sure if I should trust it. And obviously, if the battery is falling out, there's some trust issues are warranted. But Amazon has a great Indian sale in which everything is apparently put on sale at great discounts and prices, and then people have a shopping frenzy. And it's not something that I'm that interested in. And I've gotten to the point of not being interested in it because, to be perfectly honest, I've never found anything that I'm interested in as far as books and comics, etc., are concerned, to have much discount applied to them. However, every year that this happens, afterwards, I hear about somebody getting some great deal on some books, and somebody picked up these omnibuses, and somebody picked up these hardcovers at these fantastic prices. And then I get FOMO, of course I do. And it's funny how this FOMO works. And I've tried to wonder about it myself. Someone will say, oh, I picked up that Doctor Strange omnibus for $20 instead of $100. Now, I would never, I didn't even know that Doctor Strange omnibus exists. I've never heard of it. I have no interest in it. I was never going to buy it. But as soon as I hear about someone picking up a $100 omnibus at $20, I get this little bit of jealousy, and I get this bit of, this aggravation of having missed it. But what did I miss? I didn't miss anything that I wanted or wanted to get. So it is one of those weird things. But again, in an effort to keep myself focused and disciplined, I like to keep denying these things. However, this year, the sale was on. It was going on, and some friends of mine who were participating in this sale started posting on a little WhatsApp group that we all belong to. They started posting copies of books that they had picked up, and I was like, oh, that's a Ben Catchor book. That's pretty cool. Oh, look, that book is pretty good. I mean, some of these I own already, but I was like, hey, these are not Marvel DC omnibuses. These are not only those books. These are other books. Now, a friend of mine did manage to also pick up an artist edition from IDW, or I think it's IDW, right? Or Dark Horse does the gallery editions. IDW does the artist editions. So did pick up an artist edition for a song. And I am a fan of artist editions. This was a Chris Samnee artist edition, so it's an artist I admire. But I was like, wow, that is a really good deal. I have to accept that's a really good deal. But I did see a couple of books in all of their hauls that were interesting to me, the books by authors that I enjoy. So I asked them, I'm like, well, how are you seeing this? How are you finding this? And then a couple of very helpful friends told me, well, just go ahead and apply these filters. And then I started applying my own filters, and I got on there. And that's where this haul comes from. I found an incredible trove of books, and many of them had one copy left, or many of them had like maybe 3 or 4 copies left. And we started sharing links, a bunch of us friends. We started sharing links with each other. I started sending links out to people who I thought might be interested in some of these books. You know, once I've been bitten by the bug, it's kind of like a vampire thing. It's like, why not get other people bitten by it as well? So what ended up happening was, I put in a number of searches, not by author, not by title, but by publisher. And then I quickly established that, oh, there's a particular Amazon retailer, and it's Amazon itself in India, that's trying to get rid of a lot of stock that might be old, that might have been sitting in the warehouse for a long time. And they're sort of putting them on 75, 80% discount. And the first publisher I put in was, of course, Drawn and Quarterly. I looked for Fantagraphics too. Fantagraphics, I didn't find anything. Drawn and Quarterly, a whole bunch of different books came up. Not all of them were on sale. Not all of them were on very, very heavy discount. But a startlingly high number of them were. So, emboldened by the success of my drawn in quarterly string search, I went on to first, second, and then I said, who else can I think of? I looked for some dark horse. I didn't really find a whole lot of dark horse. I looked for Boom. I didn't really find anything by Boom. Again, there were some, but most of them were books that I already own. Thank goodness. And then I I kept going. I put in more other publishers I could think of, and then I just put graphics and and I just went scrolling page after page after page. It reminded me of those days when I would sit on Amazon or on other book things, and I would just search. It wasn't a thing that I had in mind. You'd click a category, or you'd put sort low price to high price, or you'd filter on hardcovers and things like that, and you just hunt. And this is the digital equivalent of being in a bookstore and then just going from shelf after shelf and just hunting and hunting and just wading through a lot of things that aren't of interest to you or you already have, and then finding one thing that you want, and then wading through a lot of other things and then finding one more thing. And it was a lot of fun. So much fun that I kind of lost track of how many things I was adding to my shopping cart. When I looked at the number of titles that were on my shopping cart, I was a little taken aback. But the price total was surprisingly low. I mean, it's not surprisingly low because that's why I'm adding it to the cart, but it was a little greedy. So I put everything into my cart, and then I started taking things out of my cart, saying, no, I don't really need that, or that's not really that big a discount, things like that. It was ridiculous. But when things go on sale, and this is my first question to all of you, and I think I can see Ryan in the comments saying something like that. Great books are even better when bought on sale. It's like, what is it about sales? Like, if I have, and I try to think about this logically, if I have $100, now I can spend $100 on 4 books if they cost $25 each, or I can spend $100 on 5 books if they cost $20 each. I can spend it on 10 books if they cost $10 each. Or, extrapolating from that, I can spend it on 20 books if they cost $5 each. But it's when you spend $150 on $5 books, I think that's where there's no sense of budget, right? It's not a question of being limited by that $100 cap. It's about that greed of, I'll take that, and I'll take it all because it's on sale, because it's a thing that I haven't been able to quite pin down, but it's obvious to me that I suffer from that affliction, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one. But what I also realized is that this is the opportunity, and as we were talking about digital, this is also an opportunity for me to try things that I might not risk trying at full price or the regular prices. So there are favorites of mine. I know that I'm going to buy the next book out by certain authors. I may not buy them immediately. I may not buy them as soon as they're released, but I will buy them. And a good example of that is Jason. Jason is an artist I really love, and Earl Grey's most recent video reminded me that Death in Trieste is out. I haven't gotten that, and I haven't actually gotten Upside Down, the previous Jason book, but everything until then I have. And I know that I'll get them eventually. I'm a big fan of Guy Delisle. I've made a video on Guy Delisle, and I've been waiting to get my hands on his Muybridge biography, which I know is out, and I know I'm going to get it. I still haven't gotten it, but I know I will. But there are those people whose next work, or whichever work I come across, I will be buying, whether I buy it immediately or not. But then there are a whole bunch of other people, and the more time I spend on YouTube and the more time I spend watching videos by gentlemen like the ones in the comments right here. Sleepy Reader, Comic Crack, good to see you. The more I watch and the more I get to know, the more time I spend on social media, getting the Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly latest releases beamed straight into my eyeballs, the more I am aware of other things existing that I'm not quite sure about because I haven't read them, because I'm completely unfamiliar. And sales like this then become, for some people, an opportunity to grab something they've always wanted. They've had it on their wish list. They've been wanting to buy it, and then it goes on sale. They get it at a good price and they grab it. For me, more often than not, while those books do exist and do make up a portion of this stack behind me, the vast majority of the stack is books that weren't on my radar until they went on sale. And it's that opportunity to try them out at not too high a risk that I really sort of latch onto. Now, of course, this might just be a rationalization of some sort of a FOMO or some sort of an idea that if it's on sale, it's great and you must buy it. And might be absolutely a consumeristic tendency. But I would like to think that there is a balance over there. It really is a question of comics are expensive. Comics are tough to choose between, and so whenever you buy one comic, there are literally dozens and dozens that you're choosing not to buy because of that limited resource. So when you have this, how else are you going to introduce yourself to all of these things that you have curiosity about, that you may even have a little bit of awareness of but don't have experience with? And that's where I think my approach to sales, and especially these big kind of things, and this is also, viewers would have seen this in my shopping videos when I go to comic book stores in the US, when I went to Alley Cat, or when I went to Challengers Comics, when I went into LCS in Oak Park, Illinois. The things that are on sale catch my attention. The box of used books, the back issues, they catch my attention because then they give me a chance to discover new things and discover new people, or find things that I didn't know about, but I recognize the author, or I recognize the artist, the writer or the artist in some way. In this case, as has happened in the past, I was guided a lot by the publisher, where I know Drawn and Quarterly. I'm familiar with Drawn and Quarterly. I know that I like their work, the work that they publish. Let me see what else they have published, and let me see what on this list is published by them, which is the approach I took. So looking over here, I can broadly break down these the publishers over here to First Second, a publisher that I've enjoyed for many, many years. First Second, I think, is known as a young readers publisher, although they have many, many books that aren't for young readers. But I do think that they have a very early readers, a mid readers, a young readers. They've got this sort of a spectrum. But I do believe that First Second, if I'm not mixing this up with something else, I think they've launched a brand new imprint specifically for younger readers. And I don't know whether that means that First Second books now will be more like the grown-up First Second list and sort of focus on that, taking the young readers over there. It might be the case, but I have over here, like I have on my shelves, a number of books published by First Second. For those of you who are relatively new and maybe not that familiar with my channel, I do have a number of shelf tour videos, my entire collection in shelf by shelf. So I think there are 16 shelf videos, and I have they're from ages ago, but those books are still on my shelf, so they're perfectly fine as far as a tour of my collection is concerned. But shelf 3 is a shelf that's almost exclusively First Second, because their formats and sizes seem to match so often. I do have many more First Second than the ones that show up in that video. But if you're interested, take a look at Shelf 3, the video for Shelf 3, to see what at a certain point of time my first second collection was. The books that I've picked up over here, therefore, represent an expansion and an addition to the shelves of a publisher I greatly enjoy. Then I mentioned Drawn and Quarterly. That's the publisher I was able to pick up the most number of books from, because that's the one I first started looking at as a search thing. And that's where I found a lot of the deepest discounts were being applied to these books. I don't know if it was intentional or if that's just what caught my eye, because that's what I was filtering. So a number of Drawn and Quarterly books. Then I have a handful of books, actually 2 or 3 from Self-Made Hero, the British publisher that I'm, again, a big fan of, given the high hit rate that they have with comics they've published that I've absolutely loved. So I found myself a couple of Self-Made Hero books, and then, well, we'll see what the others are. So first, second, Drawn and Quarterly, a couple of Self-Made Hero, I think a Pantheon, a Jonathan Cape. These are the way I'm thinking about it, because it's honestly the way I went about searching for them. So those are the ones that we'll take a quick look at. I say quick, but you know how it goes. Let's take a look through those, and maybe I can even put something under the camera. Although that whole setup over there is still suspect. But let me take a quick pause before I dive into these books to take a look through the comments real quick. Karn asks, wait, should I scroll up a little bit? Good afternoon, Comic Crack. Yes. Coming back from sales with a lot of books that are still unread, bulk buys quickly get to be intimidating stacks. This is a very wise observation, Partworks Comics reader. This is a thing that I believe I have suffered through as well. And then I'll make these kind of concentrated decisions to say, no, sit down and read all of these and go through them. One of the good things is comics, as I was saying, don't take a long time to read. I mean, unless you're reading something incredibly dense, and even then, it's a question of finding time. And I've often said, and I've often worried about the fact that as we get older, I'm going to sound like a real old man, but as we get older, we find it easier to spend money than to make time to read things, and that's sort of shameful, because I can still remember with great trauma being broke and having no money, and having, or even as a child, like I didn't have any pocket money or allowance or anything like that, but as a child you have a couple of books and you read them over and over again, and then you get a new book and you read it over and over again. So my childhood reading, not all of it, but a large portion of it, is seared into my brain in a way that has, it's taken hold, and it is formative, but it's stuck in my memory because I gave it that much attention. And a lot of adult reading is either non-existent, waiting for a time, etc. So yes, that is one of the problems with sales, and therefore I do counter that, or I try to counter that, by making decisions like, you're not going to buy any more new books until you've read the ones that you have. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes I'll have series that I don't have the next volume of, because I know that it might go out of print, and I might not get it, and it might not be on my shelf, all 12 volumes. But I'm not going to buy volume 9 until I've read volume 8. I'm not going to buy the whole thing in order to have the collection. And if I have that much FOMO that it's going to go out of print before I have it, then better get on with reading. It's like, challenge yourself is my way of looking at it. But I do end up with a number of books that I am yet to read. And sometimes you have these lists and then something suddenly comes in from nowhere and jumps to the top of the list. Like I know that there are books that I want to buy, the next book by X author or the next book in this series, and suddenly there is the sale, and I have spent all this money on all these other books that were nowhere on my radar, 48 hours ago. So the Fantagraphics sale brought in a nice new stack of books for you, Comic Crack. I did watch your video, Comic Crack. I was very jealous of certain things you have over there as well, and that's great because there was a particular thing I wanted to say about that. I think it was Spain. Yeah, the Spain collections. I forgot to show this in my previous video. I found volumes 1, 2, and 3 of those Spain paperbacks at a used bookstore at a very good price. I couldn't bring them to India with me because they were so heavy and because I was out of room, but I'm going to pick them up the next time I'm at my sister's. But we'll talk about that later. Karan says, someday I'll be very interested in knowing how you put in the filters. That's just Amazon filters. You just like look for things by a retailer. You put in a keyword. My keywords are usually publishers. What I'll do is I'll go and find how a publisher, for example, Self-Made Hero, the publisher, I noticed in the Amazon entry for Self-Made Hero that there was no spaces. It was just Self-Made Hero, all one word. So I put that in as the search term, and then I filtered on discounts, and then I sorted by price, lowest to highest. So, you arrange it in that way. You've got to sort of combine the right keywords with the right tags, with the right metadata, with the right sort, with the right kind of thing. It's just a bunch of things. Comic Crack, this is an Amazon sale. It's an annual thing, I think, called the Great Indian Sale. Everything on Amazon goes on sale, but for the first time, I was able to find a number of books that I want. I bought a number of books. I won't say that I wanted to get because, as I was saying, I may not even have thought about them until I saw that they were on 80% sale or 75% off. It was that kind of, when something is usually 2,100 rupees and then you're getting it for 300 rupees, it's that kind of gap that makes it almost impossible to resist, especially if it's a book, a publisher, an author that you know and you're aware of and you have an idea, which I do for some of them. But for the vast majority, I am taking a chance. I am taking a risk. I'd much rather take a risk with $3 at the price than at 22. Absolute Superman. I don't know what that Absolute Superman is about, but it must be the new series, right? Which is Absolute Wonder Woman and Absolute Martian Manhunter are the two that I've been able to read a couple of issues to. I need to reread books too. Josh says, yeah, I love rereading books. I love rereading books. It's one of the great joys in life. In fact, I used to have this theory that you cannot classify something as art until you have reread it or revisited it, because how it affects or how it changes or how it stands up to revisitation is almost part of how you know if something is great or not. Ryan asks, do you read regular novels as well? Yes, I do, but not recently. I mean, it's a question that comes up all the time. Recently, fiction has been something that I read less of in prose. I read more nonfiction in prose. I read a lot of comics, and comics is where I get my fiction fix. All right, we're done. Amazon has 4 or 5 sales every year. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I haven't seen one of this nature, and that might just be my obliviousness. But this is the first time I've participated in an Amazon sale to such an extent in years. It has happened before, but not in the last 2 or 3 years, at least that I can think of, at least as far as finding books that I want to find and books that I want to read. So let's get started, and I'm going to go real quick. First, we're going to go through the first, second books. And these are all the first, second books that I picked up. And we'll go through them real quick, one by one. This is a hardcover called Reynard's Tale by Ben Hartke. Reynard the Fox, obviously, over here. What I did not know, I mean, this is published by First Second, but what I didn't know is this isn't a comic. This, when I received it, I found that in spite of it being published by First Second and by Ben Hartke, whose Zeta, the Space Girl, is a fantastic series. It's featured in my top 10 comics for kids original video. I love Zeta, the Space Girl. I've read, I think, one of his Jack the Giant Killer. Is that what it's called? It's the Jack series that came after the Zeta series. My nephew has it, but he's fantastic. He's brilliant. But this is an illustrated prose book. Of course, he has written and illustrated himself. It's a beautifully designed book. It's just, you can look at the top of the pages, has that design. It's got this wonderful art on one side, writing on the other side, classic approach to it, and reading through the first few pages. The prose is actually quite good. Sometimes I'm a little iffy on it, but Ben Hartke does not disappoint over here, and the drawings are superb. But not a comic, which is an odd way to start the Comics Hall live stream, but a beautiful, gorgeous, slim little hardcover right up my alley. The format, obviously, you can't really say anything about. You can't complain about this. This is beautiful. And I'm not going to start talking about the prices each time because I don't think that's the real. I'll just make a general statement that all of these were pretty good deals. Some of them were unbelievable deals. Some of them were 50% off. I think 50% off was the lowest discount I have over here. But what those prices are and how much I saved, that's not really the point. The point is to see what is it that you are trying out and what is it that I'm going to see what I think about. So this is the first one from First Second, slim hardcover. Moving on. This is Saving Sunshine. This is from 2023. This is by Sadia Faruqi and Shazleen Khan. This is one of those books that I know nothing about. I have never seen anything or heard of anything that is by these creators, but I did see that it is published by First Second. I saw this art style. I saw a couple of pages inside it. It's very pleasant to look at, and it says that it's hard enough being a kid without being teased for a funny sounding name or for wearing a hijab. And it's even harder when you're constantly fighting with your sibling. And I'm like, okay, so this is about two Muslim siblings. And it's one of those things where it's just like, yes, looking at this art, looking at this style of storytelling, in some ways it's quite familiar in the young readers thing, but the topic, the area is also of interest. I am interested in seeing how people represent different cultures and cultural issues and problems. And I know that's a thing that it's becoming more and more prevalent in a lot of comics because, again, I feel that the comics medium has that ability to tell deeply personal stories, to be very idiosyncratic, to be very universal at the same time as specific. And looking through this very roughly, I was like, yeah, I'm going to check this out. It's a good price. Why not? Now, the way that many of these live streams go is people who are in the chat. You should feel free to be looking these things up online and then putting information into the chat. Or if you know about any of these books that I'm going to be talking about, put it into the chat, because this becomes a repository for other viewers, for people who are watching it now, for people who watch the recording, but it also becomes a repository for me because I'll see your comments now, but even if I miss them now, I come back to this just to look at the comments, just to see what people said about the books that I'm talking about. And very often I have found myself informed or clarified or corrected by you in the comments. So go ahead and start looking up all of these books. Saving Sunshine by Sadia Faruqi, Shazleen Khan, and there is this turtle on the cover. So what's that about? I want to find out. Moving on, another hardcover. This is Frizzy, written by Claribel I. Ortega, and art by Rose Busamra. And this is about a girl who has in big fizzy hair and needs it to be controlled. And her mother, right at the first scene, has taken her once again, just 2 weeks after she was last there, to the salon to get her hair fixed for some special occasion or the other. And obviously, the question of hair, the question of unruly hair, of how it should look, of how it should be straightened, is such an interesting area. It's not just, I mean, it's a thing that we have in many cultures across the world of what is beauty and what you should. So it's, while it seems like a particularly American type of thing, it's a thing that is. I have seen this in India. I have seen what is pretty hair and what is not pretty hair. How do you tame curly hair? How do you take wavy or kinky hair and make it, or how do you get a haircut that is very sober? And questions of identity and social propriety get so tied up into physical appearance that these questions being explored in these kind of stories, they have incredible potential. Now, whether they're able to rise above cliche, whether they're able to give us something new or that we haven't seen before, or whether they're able to provide us insight in a truly empathetic manner, it remains to be seen. But this idea of good hair is an interesting thing to me. The art style over here, the colors, the writing that I was able to, again, check out at a small sample thing made it seem like frizzy, especially in this nice hardcover, was definitely worth checking out. Then we have Travis Davenport for the Win. And this is the story of a very smart kid, but it's also obviously got magical and supernatural elements to it. There is a fair bit of silliness from what I can see. There is also not just fantasy, but a sci-fi bent to it. And apparently this is a series of books about our hero, Travis Davenport, over here. This is the first of the adventures, so I was glad that I was able to get the first book and see how it goes. And another one of these things is that I like reading children's comics. I like reading younger ages comics because to me, they have to have a certain directness. They have to have a certain clarity. And I talk about this at length in my video on Home Time and Superman Smashes the Klan, in which I talk about why Hans Christian Andersen was such a great writer. And there is a particular introduction to one of his stories that I quote from over there, where the scholar who's writing about Hans Christian Andersen says that he was able to remove all pretension. He was able to remove all of these things that don't work for kids, all of this stuff that adults can get they're mired in. Like, kids cut through the bullshit, and you've got to deliver to them something without pretension. You've got to deliver something to them without affectation. And that makes you finesse and finesse and finesse your stories until, and in the case of Hans Christian Andersen, until he was left with pure form, the goal, the ideal of any writer, the ideal of any, it's like, I want it to be pure form. There's no fat in it at all. And good children's stories do exactly that. They cut through all of this other nonsense where a lot of dressing can go into writing for adults, a lot of what I consider affectation and pretension. And so I always am interested in young readers' works. If I don't enjoy them, it's okay. But if I enjoy them, then I want to recommend them and I want to suggest them, and I can give them to nephews and nieces and recommend them to people. And there are people who not only ask me for recommendations for themselves, but ask me for recommendations for their kids or for their nephews and nieces, etc. So it's research. It's for the general expertise. And I'm also, by the way, very happy to see a number of people I know as viewers on YouTube as well as on Instagram who cover young readers comics on a pretty regular basis, particularly things published by Drawn and Quarterly and First Second, etc. Because for those reasons is that they happen to be on occasion very, very good comics, and some of the greatest comics ever made in the history of comics have been children's comics. So while I am definitely not, while I'm definitely on the side of saying comics aren't just for kids, I've moved beyond that where I no longer have to argue, and I don't think any one of us here has to argue that comics are not only for kids. They don't have to be only juvenile stuff. So I've come completely around. When I was about 21 or 22, that was the chip on my shoulder, trying to get everyone to like, no, you've got to read Joe Sacco, etc. It's like at this age, I'm like, yeah, everyone knows this. Everyone understands that. We've got awards there in galleries and museums and things like that. But comics for kids sometimes can be the best comics there are. So part of that research means picking up books like Frizzy, picking up Saving Sunshine and Travis Davenport, Volume 1. I'll see if this is good, then I'll seek out the other volumes. If it's not that good, I'll give it away. How am I doing? How am I doing on time? Wait, this is not First Second. I'll have to come back to that. All right, next we have Continental Drifter by Kathy McLeod. Now, I'm not sure if this is a young reader's comic, although it definitely could be. I mean, from its look and feel, the art style is very simple in some ways, but I've read I would say about a quarter of this, and it's very well written. It doesn't matter how simple it looks. There is a nice, easy voice to it, and the clarity of what it's communicating is like let's see over here, right? Here, the girl being in a bad mood with that little pencil cloud over her head. I mean, these are the kind of simple things, of what I mean by pure form. It's this kind of stuff where it's very clear what's going on. The economy is great. The expression is great. And this larger thing that I read about it is with a Thai mother and an American father, Kathy lives in two different worlds. She spends most of the year in Bangkok, where she's secretly counting the days till summer vacation. That's when her family travels for 24 hours straight to finally arrive in a seaside town in Maine. And so being split between Bangkok and Maine being where you spend your summer holidays, and that flight, I was interested from there. But that living in two worlds, or finding, wondering where you belong and thinking about belonging, this is a thing that I find a very interesting topic. I think for a lot of people, this idea of identity, etc., is not just about gender, sexuality. Of course, it's about all of that, but this idea of which country do you belong to, which nationality do you belong to. For some people, it's very easy. It's uncontroversial. It's not supposed to be a thing you think about, because that is just one thing. It's about citizenship. But do you really fit in? And do you really fit into the world you live in? Is a question that comes up. And when you think about immigrants, and when you think about people who move to different countries and have different experiences of family across different geographies, it becomes a phenomenally complex thing that we could talk about. So Continental Drifter being not just about childhood and that kind of complexity, but being about geography and location seemed like something that would be of interest to me. It's a topic that I'm very interested in. So Kathy McLeod, not McLeod, Kathy McLeod's Continental Drifter from 2024. So a relatively recent book. What's going on? Is it not focusing? Let me see. There we go. from First Second, another wonderful hardcover. Now, you'll notice in some of these that there are slight dings on the corners. Now, in some cases, I think that maybe it's these kind of things that are creating the discount, but I don't think so. I think this is just the crappy shipping that Amazon does most of the time. The vast majority of these came in a thin paper envelope or a thin plastic envelope, and no padding, no extra corners, nothing. So I'm pretty sure that a lot of these dings are just in transit to me. But it's okay, again, given the price. This is, next up is Cat's Cradle by Joe Ryu. This says The Golden Twine, and it says 1 on the spine. So I'm guessing this is another one of those series. This is another comic with a very interesting looking art style. Some of this reminds me of Kate Beaton, but with bright colors. But of course, there's a lot more dimensionality and depth to some of these pictures. It's got those type of word balloons, those speech bubbles that don't have outlines but are just blocked off by color. All in all, it seemed like quite a pleasing art style to me. And the tiny little price on this was part of that thing of like, yeah, I'm going to check it out. Let's see what this is like. There seems to be at least one other book in this where it says Suri returns in the Mole King's lair right at the back. So there are at least 2 volumes to this. But once again, just going to try something out. Looks very cool. Looks very interesting. Let me know if you know of this or any of these other books. Then we have Giants Beware, which is a comic that I think I had seen things online about, and I'd heard people talking well about it, and I picked it up because, again, it was cheap, etc., all of that stuff. But also, I remember people talking very highly of this. However, then I saw on the back that there is Dragons Beware and Monsters Beware, and now I couldn't remember if it was one of those that I had heard people talking about. So I'm also not sure. I'm guessing, since these are also available, that this must be the 3rd volume. From what I could see, again, these are just comics that I have started reading just to see what the feel of it is. I haven't read it completely. The art style, the colors, the line work looks great to me. But it did seem like I could kind of follow from the very beginning. It didn't seem like I was coming in the middle of something. So it must be they're definitely standalone adventures and stories, but they seem to be written in a way that you can jump in on any volume. However, I would like to find out if there is a sequence that I need to follow in reading Rafael Rosado and Jorge Aguirre's Giants Beware. All right. And the last second book I have is a book that came to me as one of those links from a friend who was shopping the sale. This is A Map to the Sun by Sloan Leong. And this is, unlike the other comics that we have seen, this is done in a very different or interesting approach. It doesn't quite feel absolutely young readers in the way that some of these other comics might. Maybe young adult, but it has an almost, I wouldn't say risograph, but the colors and the reproduction and the fact that each of these pages has a full color and the bleed, you can see, shows you all of the different sections in some way. And the art style is indeed striking. It seems to be a basketball story, which I'm very interested in. I'm interested in basketball stories more than I am in watching basketball. Dragon Hoops was a great comic, and this looks great. And of course, this was recommended also on the fact that it is lettered by Aditya Bidikar, someone whose lettering I know a number of us really, really love. And so this actually came as a recommendation, not for the writer artist, nothing against the writer artist, of course, but saying, hey, look, here is another book lettered by Aditya Bidikar. And if you're in the business of looking at everything that he has worked on, this is something to add to your collection. So, A Map to the Sun, probably a more grown up and more mature work than some of the others we're looking at, but absolutely beautiful visually. It's striking. Any page you turn to, kind of in its composition, in its paneling, and particularly its colors and production, looks fantastic. So, oh, speaking of Dragon Hoops, I didn't notice this, but there's a little blurb from Jean Luen Yang calling this vibrant and poetic, but it says author of Dragon Hoops, so basketball stories. Okay, so that's it for all of the first, second books we have over here. Map to the Sun, Giants Beware, Cat's Cradle, Volume 1, The Golden Twine. That's 3 of them. We've got Continental Drifter, a hardcover. We've got Frizzy, a hardcover. Travis Daventhorpe, another hardcover. And the paperback Saving Sunshine. And the illustrated book, hardcover from Ben Hutke, Reynard's Tale. All right, that's all for first, second. Let's take a quick break to take a quick look at the chat before we move on to the next books. Ryan says, make yourself reread a book before you get a new one. Yeah, that would be great, you know. And I think that when you're looking at smaller sized books, single issues, there is one thing I love about single issues. This idea that you read it and now you have to wait a month to read the next one. So in that month, you can read this a couple of times. You can discuss with people. It's like sort of the old days when you'd watch an episode of a TV show and then you'd have to wait a week before you watch the next episode. And that would give you that ability to hang around the water cooler and check, you know, rather than binge the whole thing and then worry about spoilers and things like that. I do like that approach. So that's also one of the reasons why Nikhil and I decided to put our story out in chapters. Although single issues isn't really a thing in India, we wanted to have people reread each issue while they waited for the next one to come out. And we wanted to figure out a way to make that interesting, make the rereading part of it interesting, and then maybe reread it before the next chapter comes out to brush up on, you know, what you need to go. But it is a good idea. Dry Lung Vocal Martyr, good to see you. Patwa Comics Reader says Shazleen is awesome. Her signature book, she just signed with Abrams, coming out in double volumes next year after her previous indie single volume versions. Which is this her signature book? Is this the one you're talking about, Partworks, or is it a different one and I've missed something? Sanit says he almost bought Reynard's Tale, discovered it was a prose book at the last minute. Yeah, I didn't, but Ben Hartke is so good that I'm fine with getting a prose book of his, particularly when I look at the illustrations in this. But yeah, I didn't. I wasn't as sharp-eyed as you were. Sanid also has finished. Sanid, by the way, everyone has is a publisher and a writer and an artist in India. He is the head of Studio Niyet that publishes comics. And I have talked about a couple of those comics on this channel. I talked about Hope On in a video. Must have been, wow, that was 2021, I think, when I talked about it. So good to have you here, Sanid. And Sanid is another one of those people that I was chatting with about what we should get and, you know, sharing links and seeing what's going on. So Saving Sunshine is a good children's book. Is a good children's book, he says. I'm not sure, Sanid, if that means it's not that interesting for adults. But it is a big part. Representation is a big part of the book, but it tells a story of two siblings. That's good. And it reminds you of Sisters by Raina. Sisters by Raina is a good book, so that's great. As a person who has extremely straight hair, Parikshit says, I envy people who don't since it starts poking. Yeah, see, the grass is always green on the other side. But I don't think, the individual thing is one thing. I think it's that larger social thing of saying that's what's acceptable. I once worked in an office where I was yelled at for wearing jeans to the office. And it wasn't like I was a sales rep or I was meeting customers or something. I was an editorial. I was sitting in the basement, in one corner of the basement for, whatever, 6, 8 hours a day. I didn't understand what that has to do with anything. And then someone said, well, it's the way you look when you come to the office. And I was like, man, you should care about the way I write or edit and not my genes. But that's a small kind of thing. Ritika says, could you tell me which ones are from Amazon India? Ritika, all of these are from Amazon India. Every single one. This is an Amazon India haul from the Great Indian Sale. Waiting to see what you have in store for adults. Well, yeah, okay, getting there. But I mean, I wouldn't sneeze at young readers' works. I mean, if you think about, if you think about Bone, although I don't think Bone was written specifically for young readers, but it's considered a young readers thing. It's a masterpiece of comics. I mean, I wish more comics were half as good as Bone is, as far as characterization, as far as plot, as far as consistency of world and myth making, things like that. Yeah, children's comics have some fantastic things in them. That's why I have 2 videos out on the best comics for kids. One more recently. Comic Cracks loves the coloring of that map to the sun. Yeah, it looks beautiful, doesn't it? Hello, Spambot. Good to see you. Can you show us your work too? Ritika, I think I have shown my work a little bit in an earlier live stream, but of course you could always buy my comics and experience my work that way. How's that for a slick little plug right there? Ryan says he was collecting all of the Saga comics, but they don't come out very often now, and I've lost interest. I think Saga has hiatuses, so they run certain arcs, and then they take a long break, and then they run certain arcs, and they take a long break, which, hey, if it prevents burnout, and if it prevents things from just jumping the shark, I'm all for it. Take a break. I don't have to have something continuous just for the sake of it being continuous. I kind of admire the way that British television at least used to be made, where that you would have these gaps and then you'd come back and the characters would be a little older and it would be a story set some years later, and you'd run these little series and you'd get these stories for when the stories make sense. So I haven't read Saga because I only read Saga in the deluxe volumes now. And so then when Saga came back, I didn't read it in the trades. I definitely didn't read it in the singles because they don't come out, but I didn't even get the trades because I know that 3 trades are going to make a deluxe. So I have to wait for 15 or however many issues that is. Now that the deluxe is solicited, I'll finally get to continue. So it's going to be literally years and years between the Saga thing. And it's okay. I don't mind, I don't have to have a Star Wars movie every year. In fact, that kind of makes it less interesting in some ways. I just picked up Smurf Archives 1 and 2. Smurfs are great, Josh. I love Smurfs. I think the Smurf comics are a real pleasure. I think the cartoon TV show thing was good, but the comics are good comics. They feel very, very good. Ashwita's jumping in with the plug. See, she must have heard me plug. She's like, yes, the UK and EU order links are in the video description, but there is also an India link over here. Thank you so much, Ashwita. This is for anyone who wants to check out The Sun is Made of Silver chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 3 will be out hopefully mid or towards the end of November, which we're hard at work on right now. Yeah, Parikshit is also, I think, waiting for the collected edition. Oh, you mean about this thing? Okay, yeah, maybe. Yeah, this is my story. I completely get it. If people want to just read it in one go, the story that we're doing again is being chapterized for a particular purpose, but it's also so that we can get feedback from people and we can hear people talk about it and say, what are they liking about it and what are they not. But there is also this question of density and what do you do with density. So Nikhil and I chose not to have any narration in our comic. So there's no narration, there's no third person narrator, there is no omniscient narrator, there isn't even a meanwhile or, 2 weeks later. There's no such thing. There's no date telling you what year it is. There's no location telling you what location it is. It's all just scene. And so therefore it's an interesting challenge, but it's also the effect that we want to create. So we pack things in to where we think some things will become more evident on a second read or a third read. Maybe they won't be evident on the first read because it has to be pushed in such a way. So that's another reason why we chapterize, so that people can take the time to absorb and reread rather than gallop through wanting to know what happens next and get to the end. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's too precocious. Thank you so much, Ryan, for the congratulations. Excellent. All right. Now, moving on to the next. Sorry about that. Moving on to the next books. These are now the drawn and quarterly pile. First of all, Even More Bad Parenting Advice by Guy Delisle. The parenting advice books by Guy Delisle have been books that I have seen and known of and flipped through and read parts of in bookstores. They're silly, cute little anecdotes about him being a parent and kids. I've never picked them up myself just because they felt very different from his travel logs, and I don't know why. I mean, I love Guy Delisle, but I've never ever picked up his parenting. They seemed more slight, perhaps, or more light and flimsy. There is, however, a great charm to them. They're very funny from everything I've seen of them. So when I saw this one on tremendous sale, huge bargain, etc., I couldn't resist it anymore. I mean, it's not like I've really been resisting them, but yes, so the prices are like, oh, do I want to buy this or do I want to buy a graphic novel? Do I want to buy a full story rather than a collection of anecdotes, etc.? There is that bias perhaps in me, but now I have this, and this is great. What is also interesting is that this paper seems to be this kind of closer to, like, it's nice. It's kind of like a newsprint. It's not as thin as newsprint, of course, but it's got a nice off-white sense to it. It's got a nice feel to it. It's got a little pocketbook, sort of format. It's very... So, of course, Even More Bad Parenting Advice means that this is not the first of them, but because it's so small, because it's small little scenes and little funny little anecdotes, I don't think that's much of a problem. I will probably, now that I have this, I'll probably be keeping my eye out for others. But from Drawn and Quarterly, Guy Delisle, but not his travelogues, not his autobiography, Factory Summers, but his autobiography in other ways about being a parent. Actually, all of his travelogues, it's all autobiography except for Hostage. Hostage is the only one of his works that isn't purely autobiographical. It's based on an interview that he does. So if you know these books and if you know the other ones, I know some of you are fans of this. I am joining your club. Next up, Julie Doucet's 365 Days. Now, Julie Doucet is someone whose comics I have really, really enjoyed. They are probably, to me, when I started reading indie comics, I read Julie Doucet very early in that and was very, very formative for me at a certain stage where I was already a comics reader and already a voracious and passionate comics reader. But maybe I kept myself to the familiar, either superheroes or, the kind of speculative sci-fi, fantasy, adventure comics that I grew up with. a little bit of anthropomorphic animal comics if they're of the quality of Uncle Scrooge or Usagi or Jimbo, but the autobiographical, more zine-ish, more experimental. Although I wouldn't really call these experimental. It's just not something I was used to at one point of time. But they're not experimental in the way that they're still sentences. You can read the sentences. There are illustrations and they illustrate and they show things that you understand. So I became a big, big fan of Julie Doucet's from the book, My New York Diary. And this seems to be another diary, although many, many, many years later. Now, what I'd heard about her is, because I'd gone ahead and found Dirty Plot and I'd picked up all issues of Dirty Plot. I even bought the Dirty Plot box set once in India, but it arrived absolutely torn, broken. The book was, the spines were, the pages were coming off the spine. The box set was torn and I had to return it. And it was unfortunate that there was no other copy. At that price. It was very expensive, the only other copy left. So I never got that. And it's okay because I have the original single issues. But then I heard that Julie Doucet had stopped making comics. And then she was sort of making art of other types, with collage and multimedia, things like that. And she just wasn't interested in making comics anymore. And that seemed to me a shame. This, I think, was touted or at least labeled by some as her return to comics and a diary of 1 year. And although it seems dense in some ways, not quite at that level of loose panel work, it does seem more journalistic. By that, I don't mean like a journalist. I mean, it seems more like a journal. It definitely is comics, and I'm happy to have more Julie Doucet because, as I said, I'm a fan of her comics. So that was another thing I was very happy to pick up. 365 Days, Montreal, Quebec in Canada. Then we have Palimpest, Documents from a Korean Adoption by Lisa Woolrim Sjöblom. And this is about a Korean woman, a Korean birth, who was adopted by a Scandinavian family, by a Swedish family, I think. I've heard about this, and I'd heard about this book online. The maddening, meandering path that a transracial immigrant adoptee must take in order to discover her own history. So this is about her growing up and wanting to find out where she came from. And this, the topic itself sounds very interesting to me, but it was the art style and the approach of this book that really got me interested. This seemed fantastic. It seemed very much like an illustrated book in some ways. It also seemed like an old document, given the nature of this brown, as if it's being drawn on brown paper. It's got that slight texture on it, the flatness of the colors, the shapes, the simplicity of the shapes, but the level of expressiveness is quite remarkable, I think. And then the kind of praise that this has gotten for the story that it's telling, for the nature of that story, and for the way that it examines this, all sounded amazing to me. Now, I don't know because I haven't read it, but I do think I can't remember if someone on YouTube, the people that I watch, had talked about this, or if I had read a blog post by somebody on this. And at this point of time, I can't remember where it was, but I remember it being so positive that it had stuck in my head. So when I saw this, when I saw this cover, I immediately knew what I was looking at because I'd already seen these pages. I'd already seen samples from this before. Documents from a Korean Adoption sounds and looks absolutely amazing. However, I'll find out. I'll find out more when I read this. Also from Drawn and Quarterly. Then we have The Envelope Manufacturer. There were multiple copies of The Envelope Manufacturer available at a very low price, and I know that my friends, a number of my friends, would have picked up a copy of this. This is by Chris Oliveros, who is the founder, publisher of Drawn and Quarterly. So I'm automatically going to be admiring of someone who's a publisher and makes their own comics. He's of course a cartoonist, and I believe he was a cartoonist when he started Drawn and Quarterly, when he started the magazine, the Quarterly, actually over there. I also know that he has a new book out called Are You Willing to Die for the Cause, which I've seen on Instagram. However, that one isn't on sale. But I don't think I'd heard of The Envelope Manufacturer, or maybe I had and forgot about it. I know that he retired, or at least he quit, not quit, but he retired from Drawn and Quarterly and handed over the reins to his second in command so that he could focus on making his own comics. So I wonder if this is, I should look that up if there's a copyright page over here. I think it might be, it says first edition January 2016. So now I don't remember if this is while he was still publisher of Drawn and Quarterly. It says published by Chris Oliveros, so he was still at Drawn and Quarterly as publisher. So this is his book. I have no idea what it's about. The cover has a sense, and even the back cover has colors in it that can be. They remind me of Noah Van Sciver, but they also kind of look like some other cartoonists in some other ways. But the insides are black and white. Once again, very nice, rough, thick paper on this paperback. I'm looking forward to discovering how good an author Chris Oliveros is. I already know he's a great editor and publisher. So looking forward to finding out more about the Envelope Manufacturer. Again, if you know anything about this, or if you know, whether it's any good, etc., let me know in the comments. What else? Moving on. All right, yes, here we go. This is a book by Don Brown, someone I've not heard of, but then because of the way this book looked, I did do a quick search on him, or on Amazon, not on Wikipedia or something like that. And over there, I saw that he has a number of books, and his books seem to be biographies, or they seem to be about horrible things. Like, okay, right. So there is at the back, there's the Great American Dust Bowl. There's Drowned City, which is about Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. There is In the Shadow of the Fallen Towers, which I'm guessing is about the aftermath of 9/11. Then there are stories, the unwanted stories of Syrian refugees, and Fever Year, the killer flu of 1918. So nonfiction work seems to be Don Brown's forte. This is 83 Days in Mariupol, a war diary about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And there's good old Putin over there. This is the art style and the lettering style. And I have to admit that from this page onwards, I was hooked. That looked really good to me. I don't know what the way it conjures up what it does, and then this this approach to the devastation of the initial attacks. Here are pages of them fleeing in traffic after having filled up petrol. Fill the car up with petrol, get the medicines from the pharmacy, and leave the city. And this is, I mean, I'm sure it's a harrowing read, but there's something about the way that it's being presented, the drawings and the writing, the lettering coming together, that is immediately to me arresting. That is immediately to me piquing my curiosity. And what I've read of this again has got me instantly intrigued and hooked on it, to the extent that I really want to find all the other Don Brown books as well. So this is like a good example of that discovery thing. Like all of these things are discovery, except for, well, I mean, I know Chris Oliveros as a publisher, and I know Julie Doucette, and I guess I know Ben Hatke. But everything else, oh, and Guy Delisle, and I know Guy Delisle. But apart from these three or four, everything else are people, creators that I'm unfamiliar with, that I have not read anything by. And over here, there's another one, Don Brown, who I know nothing by, but again, immediately makes me want to read not just this book, but also seek out all of these other books that are listed back here as well, because I can just imagine how he is addressing all of these things with this art style. Or does his art style change? Is it different? That's a thing that I'd like to find out again. But a lovely, slim hardcover. This isn't actually from, interestingly, this isn't from Drawn and Quarterly. This was just in that stack incorrectly. This is from Clarion Books. I've never heard of Clarion Books. And it on the back, it does say a one-time donation has been made to Razom, Ukraine. But Clarion Books seems to be an imprint of HarperCollins. So this, at least as a sticker from HarperCollins India, looks fantastic. Can't wait to sink my teeth into it. Arindam Sen, hello, good to see you. Lash G asks, have you got any of Tatsumi's collections published by Drawn and Quarterly? Yes. And his autobiographical A Drifting Life. I do not have A Drifting Life. That is horribly out of print as well. So I've tried to get my hands on it a couple of times and I have not been able to. But a couple of the others from Drawn and Quarterly, the ones that were edited and designed by Adrian Tomines. So Abandon the Old in Tokyo, The Pushman and Other Stories, are both books that I got. And I picked up another one paperback, but I can't remember it. And that's one that I haven't read yet. So there you go. There's a good example of something that I have picked up and haven't yet gotten to. Now you remind me, there is that third Tatsumi I picked up last year that I haven't gotten to. But yes, I've enjoyed those. I've enjoyed those very well. Arindam, you've missed a bunch of stuff, and I might have referred to you anonymously a couple of times, but no more. Next up, we have, coming back to Drawn and Quarterly, is Blabber, Blabber, Blabber Everything. This is by Linda Barry, who is a comics writer, artist that I really admire. Now, I know not everybody loves Linda Barry, and she does work, speaking of like Julie Doucette, she does seem to work in a scrapbook format very often. There are a number of books of hers that I've seen her mix in photographs and illustrations, etc. But she's also typographically, I think, wonderful, and the way that she uses design of a page in order to do things has always sort of interested me. But the most interesting thing I think about Linda Barry is that when you've got something like this, you think about it as, ooh, it's an artistic presentation, or look at it being all cool and experimental but she's incredibly readable. And I think that is what blew my mind the most about her. You start reading her comics and you'll just move from panel to panel. You'll move from page to page with very little friction, and that to me, I think, is the sign of a great comics artist, is where they're able to make you, they're able to harness this velocity in their storytelling, and you get what they want you to get. You feel the way they want you to feel, whether you're feeling icky, whether you're feeling a little creeped out, whether you're feeling sad. All of those things happen, that those emotions are not they're not barricaded by the presentation being the way it is. Rather, this presentation ends up having that additional effect, which is something I wasn't expecting. I was expecting a lot of Linda Barry to work as almost like coffee table books, where you can sort of flip through them and see, oh, look at what interesting things she's trying on this page, etc., etc. But a lot of her stuff, especially the sort of autobiographical childhood stories that she writes, are extremely touching and moving, and her essays and her writing about creativity and her writing about writing and drawing are phenomenal to me. So the fact that this was one of those books that was up there on these huge sales, etc., this was a no-brainer that I'm going to pick this up. Now, I don't know what blah 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 everything means. I think this is a collection, but it says comics from around 78 to 81. And it does say volume 1 right at the bottom over here. So this could be the first volume in some sort of a collected Linda Barry. So I don't know if this is going to be ephemera and other stuff, or if it's going to collect all the comics and is everything, or blabber, 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 everything. Is it going to be the complete collected Linda Barry when all the volumes are complete? I don't know. I'll have to look that up and learn about it. So I don't think I have anything from 78 to 81, but I could be wrong. I wonder if there is going to be double dipping or if there's going to be overlaps between them. It says contents are merchandise and return requested. The stuff is funny. Like, I think like Chris Ware, like Dan Clowes, there's a lot that if you just start reading all the stuff that is in these comics, if you read all the fine print, if you read all of the small little stuff, it's very funny and very sardonic in many ways. Arindam says, always happy to help you part with monies. Yes. So Arindam is the friend I was talking about who made me aware that there are comics over here on this sale that I could be interested in. I mean, I was nicely oblivious and not broke at that time. Let's see. What else do we have? Okay, let's continue with the Drawn in Quarterly. But in the Drawn in Quarterly, the one thing that really grabbed my attention when I first started looking at this sale, the first thing that came to my attention was a Lisa Hannawalt book. And Lisa Hannawalt is someone I've heard of. I've seen a couple of things by. Hot Dog Taste Test was a book that I once picked up in a bookstore and went through about a third of, just standing there and reading it. And it was very interesting, but and I've always wanted to try more Lisa Hannawalt, but like the way that maybe Linda Barry affects some people, I was a little concerned that is it too experimental? Is it too out there? Or is it a style that I'm not going to be interested in or isn't going to appeal to me once I really start getting into it, in spite of what I had enjoyed because of the nature of the work. So what I was really happy to find in the sale was Coyote Dog Girl, I Want You, My Dirty Dumb Eyes, and Hot Dog Taste Test. These are 4 Lisa Hannawalt books that I was able to pick up, all very cheap. And I was like, hey, look at that. I've gone from knowing nothing about her. I mean, technically, I still don't know anything about her, but I've gone from knowing or having nothing by her to having 4 books by her, and now I can do a good survey. Now I can actually read through all of this and see what I feel about her. Now, I think, and again, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think Lisa Hannawalt ended up with a show on TV. Maybe it was animated, with the bird's head character that looks familiar over here, but she also has this painting, some of which reminds me of, say, Brecht Evans. At the same time, you've got other things that look like this. You've got very non-traditional comics, if you want to look at it this way, but also very funny, very interesting, very smart. Maybe it's one of those things is that maybe it's too smart, maybe I'm too dumb to get it. It's always my fear with things like that. Like if the whole thing was like this, it would be different, but it's also this incredible stylistic range. And therefore, Hot Dog Taste Test, which is the one book that I had some sort of an idea about, is was something I was going to get. And I know that, let's see, like over here, Jaime Hernandez is a big fan, and Jaime Hernandez actually blurbs on a couple of these things, but Amy Sedaris is also, one of the people who's blurbing on this. And I'm like, all right, this sounds kind of interesting. Now, Coyote Dog Girl, I think, is the most outright bizarre thing when I was looking through it. And at the same time, it is, like I was saying about Linda Barry, it is readable. You do go from panel to panel, from scene to scene. You do follow the story. There is no hiccups in it. It's just, I think it's a question of expectation and then defying that expectation. But I've always since that time been intrigued by Lisa Hannawalt. She seems very interested in a certain kind of absurdity, but also a certain kind of grotesqueness. But she has such a range of art styles and approaches that it's really hard to classify her just going through these things at random. And when you look at things like this, it seems, kind of simplistic in ways, but it's that humor, I think, that runs through all of it, as well as some seriously impressive line work that creates for me this curiosity. So all of these books, these 4 books over here, these 4 books are for me to have a crash course in an author I'm not at all familiar with. I have heard a lot of good things about. I have heard a lot of praise for, and whatever I have seen has been very intriguing. So 4 books by Lisa Hannawalt. My Lisa Hannawalt collection goes from 0 to 4 in one fell swoop, thanks to this Amazon sale. We are almost at the end. But there are still a handful of Drawn and Quarterly books left. One of these being Birds of Maine by Michael DeForge. Now, Michael DeForge, talking about Lisa Hannawalt, Michael DeForge is also a person who I'm not quite sure what to make of. And many people, including viewers of this channel, members of the Friends of FTLOC Discord channel, like they say, yeah, he's not for everyone. He's not for everyone's tastes, etc. And a long time ago, I picked up an issue of Michael DeForge's Lose. I think it was Lose number 4. And I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, but I did enjoy reading it. And then I was told that Ant Colony was a book of his that is possibly the most accessible, the most relatable in some ways, even though the drawing and the cartooning can be quite bizarre. And I got Ant Colony a couple of years ago. I read it and I did think it was accessible, even though, yes, the visual aspect of it is something that is not automatically familiar. I thought it was very good. So I am ready to try more Michael DeForge. At the same time, I know, because I've been warned, that he's not to everyone's tastes. Not everyone can appreciate him. So then those old fears of, am I smart enough to understand this, will arise. But once again, it's a risk worth taking, I think, at these prices for sure. But also, how else am I going to learn new things? Or how else am I going to expose myself to things? I may not like it, I may not enjoy it, but at least I'll say that I gave it a shot. I think Birds of a Feather seems like it is the heftiest work of his that I have gotten so far. This is only the third work, if counting that little slim volume of the of Lose. So I'm looking forward to this, and I'm going to see whether this encourages me to continue with Michael DeForge, or if I sort of reach a conclusion about my level of love for his work. So far, I will say that he has surprised me. This is going to be, I think, Birds of Maine is going to be the acid test. And then two more from Drawn in Quarterly. Shigeru Mizuki's Kitaro, the classic manga. It says so right here, Japan's classic manga. But I've known that Kitaro is a sort of, it's a young reader's comic, but anyone can enjoy it because of its stylings. But I've never read anything. So from what I know, it's a boy dealing with monsters, and of course, Shigeru Mizuki has a couple of other books, and Drawn in Quarterly has published a number of Shigeru Mizuki books. They've published multiple volumes of Kitaro. I think this is the first volume, and the first volume was out of print, and this is a reprint with a different cover. I think the old ones used to have a little, they do have a triangle on this corner with a color and then a little cartoon of Kitaro on them. And that's how you know that it's the older editions. This is the newer edition. I don't know if they're going to publish every single volume in these covers. This is just, I mean, they are standalone stories, but I was happy to get the first one in. So this is where I'm going to start, but I don't think I have to get them all. There is one more Kitaro volume that I found on sale. It hasn't been delivered yet, but I don't know what number that is. But I know this is the first one. And one that I was very, very happy to get, like a lot of these are like, okay, so Linda Barry, again, you've got someone that I'm familiar with and I know. Lisa Hannawalt, I haven't read anything by, but at least I know her name. Michael DeForge, I know a little bit. So now we're stepping out of the complete unknown to a little bit unknown. And then over here, it's like, it might as well be a complete unknown. But I do know other works of Mizuki's. Now, something that I know only by reputation is Hayashi's Red Colored Elegy from Drawn in Quarterly. This is a book that I've heard a lot about, but either it's been out of print or it's been expensive. I know I've looked into getting it a couple of times. It has a very odd, well, I wouldn't say odd, but it has a unique art style, which seems very simplistically manga-esque in some ways, but also has a sort of fluidity and a kineticism that I really like. But Red Colored Elegy is not a book that I've ever, I've never been able to get my hands on it before now, so I'm very happy to have it. One thing I don't understand, though, is that this is a Drawn in Quarterly book, and it's done in the Western style with the spine on this side. However, this is a Drawn in Quarterly book, and it's done in the Japanese style. So Drawn in Quarterly seems to have some inconsistency with the way that they print manga. I think maybe this is an older book, and in the older times, like Dark Horse doing Akira, maybe they switched it and now they don't switch it anymore. Now they preserve the format. It's odd to me that, that I picked up two manga from Drawn in Quarterly and they're formatted differently from each other. But Red Colored Elegy is something that I'm looking forward to. Kitaro, I think, is a bit of a gas, but also, I mean, look at the drawing over here. This is masterful stuff. You can't just say, oh, it's a kid's comic about monsters or something like that. This is incredible. So I'm looking forward to both of these. All right, what do I have left? I've got a few left. Do I have any other questions for right now? No. All right, so about the home stretch now. The last Oh, it's not the last. Hold on. I've got two more. Two more drawn in quarterlies. This one is Movements and Moments. This is a drawn in quarterly anthology comic. First of all, with a very striking cover. I really love this art style. And it has a blurb by Eleanor Davis. And it's funny because when I look at this, I think of Eleanor Davis, probably, from some stuff in How to Be Happy. Not that this is Eleanor Davis, but it's got the thing on there. And Eleanor Davis is The Hard Tomorrow, by the way. Because that's the book that she's credited over here for this blurb, is another book that I did order from Drawn and Quarterly. It was delivered. I did read the whole thing, but it was damaged. And so I have returned it, but I've returned it for a replacement. So I should get a replacement soon. So that's another book that was part of this haul that isn't part of this video. And then there was another one called The Constitution Illustrated, which was also damaged and I've returned. But anyway, this is a collection of short stories, not necessarily fiction, but they're about movements across the world. They're about activists and protests, and mainly involving women. It's all about women, actually. It's all about women movements at various places in the world, done by various artists. It's got a collection like any anthology. It's got a number of different styles in it, but what really drew me to it was the range of stories stretching across the world. There are a number of Indian creators in here. There are a couple of stories based in India, and there are Indian writers and artists in here, people I hadn't heard of, and that definitely piques my curiosity as well, like this story over here. But then there are stories from Bolivia. There are stories from Japan. There are stories from really all over, from Europe, from Asia, from Africa, about women and various movements that they were involved in, social movements, political movements, economic movements. As an anthology, it seems very guided by that principle, but the insides, the pieces that I see inside, the topics that they deal with, as well as the art styles being used, make it, look at that, make it very interesting to check out. I wasn't quite sure because anthologies tend to be so hit and miss, and this is something we all know, is that there's never an anthology in which everything is great. But then actually there are some anthologies, like some mixtapes or whatever, can be like consistently great. Like they could have a lot of good stuff in it. So when I remember one, I think The Tipping Point, it's a European anthology published by Humanoids. I felt that way about The Tipping Point. I felt like more stories were great in it than not, and that was good. And I've got I've got a good feeling about this one, that because of the finesse, or not, because of the focus that it has, and because of it, I feel that it would be less scattered or less arbitrary in some ways. At least flipping through it, it seems spectacular art on a number of them, on most of them actually. So I'm really looking forward to seeing, to checking out each and every piece over here. And the final drawn in quarterly book that I was able to pick up. I keep hitting this microphone. Sorry. The final drawn in quarterly book that I was able to pick up is by Jessica Abel and Matt Madden, two cartoonists, comics artists and writers who I really like. This is Mastering Comics. And it says Drawing Words and Writing Pictures Continued, because this is the second book, kind of the way that Reinventing Comics and Making Comics were follow-ups to Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. Drawing Words and Writing Pictures is a book by Jessica Abel and Matt Madden. And Jessica Abel and Matt Madden, I've read comics that they have written, and I've admired their comics, particularly What's the Jessica Abel comic that was really the one where the girl is traveling in Spain? La Perdida. Yes, Art Babe. That was a great comic that I read. Now, them making books about comics and about making comics, like I'm interested in this automatically. Um, you've got a, it's not quite like understanding comics, it's not in comics, but it is in this huge landscape thing. And even though I don't have the first book, since this is a continuation of it, I'm just like, all right, this will be a more sophisticated. That one was more basic, this one is more advanced, so I can jump into the more advanced. There's a chapter on comics on screens, comics on paper. Look at that, like we were just talking about that a little while ago. Here's something about perspectives, etc. I'm like, yeah, I'm not an artist yet, but I want to find out more and more and more about comics. And then, of course, most of the time we find out about comics by reading comics. I'd love to take a more structured approach to that, and Understanding Comics is a fantastic book, and I've also enjoyed making comics by Scott McCloud, but I haven't read that many more. Like I haven't read the Will Eisner book. I haven't read so many other books about making comics or about comics. Like I'm not that interested in the literary theory part of it, although some of it is interesting. Books like Unflattening were interesting, but that basic nuts and bolts construction of it, I think, is something that I do, particularly today, now that I am trying to write and publish comics. I am intrigued and interested by. So getting this on sale was fantastic, but I feel like I kind of want to have this on my table, and I want to be able to reference this and read through this at all times. So this is not something I want to put up on a shelf or put away. This I want to be a ready reference thing. So mastering comics. Maybe I should get drawing words and writing pictures as well. Maybe I'll just pay full price for that, just so that I can go from the beginning if this is too advanced for me. Let's see. We'll see how it goes, and I'll keep you all updated. Okay. And then there were, oh, hello, good to see you. We have the Hierophant Entertainment finally making it to a live stream. Great. Well, we're almost done over here. We've got 3 books left. This is Eustace by S.J. Harris. I have never heard of S.J. Harris. I've never heard of Eustace, but this one I picked up because it was published by Jonathan Cape. I know that Jonathan Cape often publishes comics, say, that Drawn in Quarterly publishes, and Jonathan Cape publishes them across the world, where Drawn in Quarterly is doing it for Canada. But then looking through it and looking at the art style, I was hooked. I was intrigued at first. There's this pencil, but it's so beautiful and haunting in some ways. This scratchy, but also shaded. It's kind of like edged and dotted, but also soft and shaded. There's a very unique feel to it, and like the cartooning, the caricaturing of this is creating this slightly creepy, almost Edward Gorey-esque feeling over here. It's about a sick kid, and it's about nightmares. Now, that's all I know about it. But I'm instantly intrigued. So drawn to it once again, like in most of these cases, drawn to it because of the publisher. That's the thing that I'm putting in the filter and finding a search for, and then ending up with something I hadn't heard of before, something I know nothing about, and something I'm intrigued by. So this is kind of, I think, an exemplifier of the kind of things that I've been talking about, as are Marguerite, Now, this is one of those that comes from Self Made Hero. I did also pick up a copy of The Boxer by Reinhard Kleist. I already have The Boxer, but I picked up an extra copy for a friend who I think would enjoy it and who I mentioned to them, and they said, "Hey, will you get that for me? And I'll pick it up from you, etc., etc." So that was Self Made Hero, because all of the Reinhard Kleist English translations that I've read, the Nick Cave book, the Johnny Cash book, the Fidel Castro book, the book about the Olympic marathon runner, and the boxer, are all published by Self Made Hero, as is Magritte. This is not a biography, which you have to admit is a pretty good title for a book on Magritte. But let me. It isn't really a biography. At the back, it says, "Giddied by the prospect of promotion, Charles Singular makes the whimsical decision to buy a bowler hat. It is a satisfying if fanciful purchase. But there's a problem. This particular hat once belonged to the surrealist painter René Magritte, and by donning it, Charles has unwittingly entered the artist's unbridled off-kilter world." So it does seem to be a way of talking about Marguerite and talking about Marguerite's world, but it seems to be taking a slightly askew approach to the biography, not your straight up biopic, but probably closer to, well, I mean, that description makes it sound a bit like being John Malkovich, but probably the approach that we saw in The Adventures of Hergé, for example, or the Mackay biography that I think I've talked about on a couple of on a live stream before, which isn't really a standard biography, but taking a fanciful, fictionalized approach to doing a biographical storytelling job. And I really like those things, because sometimes I often think about biographies as being very difficult to do, because if you don't have like 600 pages of prose, especially in comics, especially in slight comics, I remember talking about the Che biography by Breccia and Osterheld, an impressionistic biography. And it's like it isn't hagiographic, but it is very much about an impression of the man. It's very much a certain kind of tone, a certain kind of thing. And you're not going to be truly three-dimensional about it. And that book doesn't make an attempt at it. But usually you're not going to be able to be warts and all and complexity. There are some exceptions, and I will in my next video talk about a biography which I think is absolutely spectacular in doing that comprehensive sort of approach. But when lacking that, or when not having that, you end up sort of limiting the story that you're telling. Instead of talking about a man or a woman, giving a life and all of its complexities, you end up sort of reducing it to a few things. So that feels the opposite of what a biography should do. And that happens more often than not. So when you have an approach like this, I think that this allows you a certain kind of leeway in, like what are you going to do in however many pages. This is 64 pages, like classic European album type, 64 pages as a Tintin adventure. So like, what are you going to do? Well, take a surrealistic approach to a surrealistic painter. I think that part of it, and then the artwork, the lettering, like everything on the visual side of it looks great. And that approach to me sounds right up my alley as well. So this is by Campi and Zabu. Again, creators I have never heard of. Vincent Zabu is the writer, and art and colors by Thomas Campi. Magritte, this is not a biography. Ryan says The Art of Comic Book Writing by Mark Neese is a great book covering a lot of theory behind comic book writing. Excellent. Thank you so much, Ryan. I'm going to make a note of it. Comic book writing is a thing that I have a slight bit of interest in these days. And the final book for this evening is another one of those books that I have never heard of, by people I have never heard of, that I found because I looked for books by a publisher. This is Siberian Haiku. And this is also one of those pleasures, because I didn't know it was this size, and I didn't know it was this thickness. I mean, I guess I knew the page count because I'd looked at that, but what I had really looked at was the inside pages, the artwork, and a little bit about the story. And just like the war book over there, this is about relocation of this is about Lithuanians, right? So 1941, a band of soldiers pulled 8-year-old Algis and his family out of their beds and told them to prepare for a long trip. And this is how masses of Lithuanians were forcibly relocated to Siberia. Now, I think when I was young, I read a book about a Siberian camp. I think it was called The Endless Steppe by Esther somebody, Hotzik, maybe, I don't know. And it created, I mean, it's something that's still stuck in my head. And of course, we know about Siberia as like in popular culture, but the experience of being imprisoned or living in Siberia, that book, The Endless Steppe, is the only book I've ever read till today about that. So I thought that this would be a good correction to that, where this looks beautiful, but also the story that it tells is, it seems powerful, and it seems through the eyes of children, just like the book from my childhood that I'm remembering or half remembering right now. It's got that purity of that look. So Apples Don't Grow in Siberia is the name of this chapter. It looks absolutely fantastic, and I was kind of hypnotized by the couple of pages of this that I saw online. Again, not a book that I've ever heard of, but published by Self-Made Hero is who I was searching for. Jurga Ville and Lena Itagaki. So I think, yes, Lena Itagaki is the artist. Jurga Ville is the writer of this mammoth, well, not mammoth, but, fairly chunky-sized Siberian haiku published by Self-Made Hero. And there you have it. That is the entire 25 or so books that I had over here. Of course, there are a couple that I have returned and will be replaced, and there are even more books on the way here. Some of them are arriving Monday. Some of them will be scattered throughout October. I don't know exactly when they'll reach. So in some ways, this is half a haul. But as the title of this says, there's no such thing as half a haul. That's probably a reference to a joke of, if it takes 5 men 10 days to dig a hole, how many men does it take 20 days to dig half a hole? And the answer is there is no such thing as half a hole. But this is a substantial chunk of the haul. And it was completely unplanned, just that the way that this live stream was completely unplanned. But it was an opportunity, as I said, to try out a number of works and a number of writers of which I had no previous knowledge until the discounts brought them crashing into my view. So I'm really looking forward to sinking my teeth into these. If you have read any of these, or if you know anything about them, I'd love for you to leave them in the comments or in the chats at this point of time or later when you're watching this. If you are interested, as I said before, right at the beginning of the live stream, if you're interested in purchasing my comic in the UK or Europe, this is the last night before my friend leaves. So you can follow the links in the description. And of course, if you're in India, you can just, there's no time limit. But yeah, you can get them from here. This is part of my research, is the way I look at it. This is my research as a publisher. This is my research as a writer. And of course, it's my thing as I don't know, like talking about it on YouTube. I wanted to share this, even though I haven't read any of these. I wanted to share this because it feels very exciting to have a whole box of things that I know very little about. Most of the time when I'm making videos, I'm talking to you about things that I have read and reread and thought about and decided to talk about in a particular way. But it is also interesting to be completely blind and completely flying, like without a parachute in some ways, and seeing whether what I picked up is going to appeal to me or is going to be of any, is going to be any fun or not, etc., which is what I think I'm in for with this collection of things. Of course, a number of the books that I had talked about in previous hauls, I have read, but a number of them I have yet to get to as well. So I fear that I might be in that place right now where we were talking about at the beginning of this live stream, where we've got this, you're getting too many unread books and they're piling up. So for now, I'm going to call a moratorium on buying more comics, at least until I finished reading all of the different comics that I have picked up in the last couple of months, including these. Not every single one of them, but I'm not buying any more comics until I've gone through at least 3/4 of them. Let's put it that way. So that's my that's my commitment made live on this stream in front of all of you. Parikshit is off to bed. I believe I should be also off to bed. Thank you, everyone, for watching, whether you're watching this live or whether you've put up with all of this on a recording. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I'll catch you at the next video. Bye.